You got that one question from, what was that one thing the commenter asked about the barge or something? What was it? Yeah, what was the name?
Immigration.
The Bibby Barge. Okay, so yeah, because I looked up on it after you asked me about it. Somebody asked us about what we thought about the Bibby Barge, United Kingdom. We'll put up a picture of a story or something affecting it so you guys know what we're talking about. Might have got the name wrong. Basically what this thing is, it's a alternative housing plan for asylum seekers, because the UK, one of the local governments or something, was housing asylum seekers in hotels. It got very expensive and they wanted to come up with a cheaper housing alternative for it. So there's controversy around this, as one would have, but this leads into a broader conversation about how to deal with asylum seekers, immigration policy, and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's many angles for this. Where to start? There's a lot. Okay. When you're looking at this from an emergency management or a disaster management point of view, a lot of this is consequence. I'm about to say management 5 times in a row, but a lot of this is what's known as consequence management. You're dealing with the thing after it happens. So emergency management deals with immigration generally insofar that it says, okay, the people are here, deal with human rights and make sure people are as happy as possible because you want people to be happy. Emergency management, generally speaking, doesn't really have a horse in the race of what if immigration is good or bad. It's like, okay, there's people, they need a shelter, figure out the shelter. Emergency management is we're going to deal with it now, respond to the thing. When you look at immigration as a risk, though, from more of a disaster point of view, there are good things and bad things that happen because of immigration. Countries generally need immigration because you may have a bunch of people in your country that don't want to do certain jobs that people who immigrants, would want to do. So there's economic reasons. Sometimes you'll have, the best example for this is you'll have a country where people get much older and you'll have a healthcare system, for example, that needs to support all of these retiring people, but the country isn't having enough kids. So they have to bring in immigrants to kind of have a big enough young class to be able to pay for and run the system for the aging class. There's a whole bunch of stuff in with this. But more specifically, when looking at the barge, whenever you put stuff in place for cheaper housing, be it for immigration, be it for shelters, be it for whatever, whenever you put in cheaper housing, you're saving money because it's cheaper, but you're probably providing a, relatively speaking compared, a worse quality of life. So anytime something's cheaper like that, especially if it's substantially cheaper, the food's probably not as good, there's probably less square footage, the accommodations are probably less convenient. And look, if you're someone who doesn't like immigration, if you're someone who doesn't want asylum seekers, then you'll probably say, well, you know, sounds good, they shouldn't be here anyways, fine, fair enough. If you're someone who, you know, is really pro-asylum seeking and thinks that they should have better accommodations, then you might think that anything below a certain level is just unacceptable. Here, one sec. John is tripping over muddy superland here, so we're gonna just come back the other way. We'll walk the other way because I don't want you to trip and die for a shot. We're gonna just high face here. Anyways, sometimes, you know, depending on where you are in this, you'll have different opinions. But the fact of the matter is that when you spend less money on housing, you get less for it, generally speaking. And there's costs associated with that. So if people are in a more cramped environment, so it's higher population density, then you'll often run into problems where if there's a disease, it will spread faster. If people don't have as convenient of sanitary conditions, if they have a shared communal shower, for example, as opposed to access to their own personal one, they won't be able to shower as often. This leads into potentially hygiene issues. They won't be able to bathe as often, right? So there's costs here. So whenever you lose something, there's probably going to be some secondary consequence that you might have to pay for, or you might not. You might assume as a society that you're just going to kind of let these things happen and let people's health depreciate You could do that. It gets very expensive. There's potentially human rights problems there, but that's kind of the basic debate that you're having. And the Bibby barge was another example here where I believe when I read the case a couple days ago, I believe the town that it's housed within was saying that they, because a barge is like a large ship with just stuff on it. So you basically make like a really cramped in hotel in a ship was kind of the idea. The town that the ship was docked in was basically saying that these people are taking a huge amount of their resources, straining their health system, etc., because the barge wasn't apparently as ideal of living conditions as when they were in the hotel. So that's the kind of idea. But anyways, the lesson to be learned from cases like that, that's more specific to that case, is when you deal with immigration, when you deal with asylum seeking specifically, so people before they've, gained a full permanent residency status or before the government's kind of figured out what they're going to do with them, those people need to be put somewhere if you're going to keep them in the country. And the cheaper you get, the more secondary effects you get. I would be interested to see the numbers on this because the UK has a social medicine system where I would assume asylum seekers would have a certain amount of health care sort of guaranteed to them because the government is considering them something within the legal immigration system, right? And they know they don't have any money or much money. So I would assume they would be doing something to assist them with health care. And there'd be sort of like a ratio where as the accommodations get cheaper and cheaper, your healthcare costs would go up at a population level. And it could be the case where the cost in healthcare for making their accommodations cheaper is more than just paying for the hotels or more than just paying for the other thing when you look at the government like as a whole budget thing. So I'd be curious to see what that looks like just from a purely money standpoint. It may be the case that you're better off putting them, it's cheaper to put them in the expensive hotels because less people get sick. It might not be the case, but if it is, then that would be interesting. Yeah. I don't know, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. Okay, but what about immigration as a whole? Because that, topic comes up a lot and you're seeing quite a few countries get, let's say, animated about immigration policy. A lot of Western nations you're seeing more frequent protests, anti-immigration protests, things like that. So, what about immigration? What are we talking about immigration here? The major thing that kind of keeps coming up in a lot of these protests and the major topic kind of around immigration focuses on largely whether or not cultures can be cohesive. So you'll have people that like living one way, you'll have people that like living another way, and how do those two people mix or not mix? Depending on how you view this or phrase this or word this, this can be viewed as xenophobia. This can be thought of as, well, if these two kind of people don't mix, then you just get rid of all the kind of people from the thing that are the minority, and then you give them their own country and that whole kind of thing. The problem with this is sometimes when people have this conversation, it's an excuse for them to kind of just be racist, and they don't actually know the policy position and they don't really know what they're talking about, but they're just they just don't like the other and it's an excuse to get rid of the other. Other times there's a legitimate concern about cultures that are clashing. Like if you have a culture that one example that you hear a lot is how do you treat women in a society, for example? So you'll have the examples brought up all the time. You hear this talked about all the time of this one culture believes in women and men essentially being equal members of society. This other culture believes that women are essentially the property of men. Those two ideas are mutually exclusive, right? So how do you manage that? How do you negotiate? How do you figure that out? And I can see how someone could be afraid of something from that or go, okay, well, that's a problem. From a disaster management or emergency management point of view, from more of an emergency management point of view, you don't really influence the policy. You kind of just work within the box that you're given and you manage the consequences of whatever happens. So if there's a cultural conflict between two different groups, you're focusing on the crime, you're focusing on the bad things that people do, and then usually this is a police action. You're helping, enforce laws that exist based on whatever country you're in. So the culture doesn't really matter because you're focused on the effects. You're not really focused on the cause. That's from emergency management. From a disaster management point of view, that's kind of interesting because you could be looking at public policy, you could be looking at changing policy. So is it good or is it not good to highly restrict immigration? What a question. I think to really answer that question, you'd have to look at different countries' crime rates and then different countries' demographic distribution, cultural homogeneity, the spread. So how uniform are they based on some sort of social factors, religion, race, employment, whatever. But the problem here is just because, for example, this country country A might be generally homogenous and it might have a low crime rate, doesn't mean that the homogeneity is causing the low crime rate. Like, you could find things that show a correlation, but you haven't necessarily established a causal relationship. And I'll do another one. We'll do another video on correlation versus causation in a sec, but you'd have to basically prove that there's a causal relationship between something and something else, and then that could inform the policy. It could very well be the case that multiculturalism has failed and that the best thing you can do for crime is become homogenous nations. That could be the case. It could also be the case that those things are completely unrelated and you're trying to, solve a problem that doesn't exist. It just kind of depends on the data. And I haven't seen anything convincing yet to go either way there. Usually when this stuff gets brought up, it's viewed as a dangerous field of study, so it doesn't tend to get studied. I can understand why. If you come to a sloppy conclusion there, a bunch of people can get very violent. Makes sense. It's a tricky one. Anyways, it's clear that there are a lot of protests going on of people that are very animated because of bad and horrible things happening. And I think they need more data. One of the things that I've heard a lot surrounding this is, trying to think of how to phrase this. One of the things I've heard a lot is that insert group in insert country is doing all of the crime, or is doing most of the crime, or the crime is disproportionate. But then when that is said, what I often will see or hear is that, in fact, it's not. When you look at the stats, it's a different distribution. So often you'll hear people make these sorts of claims that haven't actually looked at the numbers. You see the reverse sometimes too, as well, where someone will make these claims and that it isn't a problem when it actually is. And I just think in general, when you're going to be having these sorts of conversations that are potentially dangerous around, hey, let's get all of insert people out of insert area, you really want to know the data before you start talking about forcibly moving people from places. That stuff can get pretty dangerous. People don't like it when you remove them from their homes. It's really not nice. People really don't like that sort of stuff, It's just, yeah. Anyways, topic came up. I know that some people would want me to kind of, say, is this right or is this wrong? But unfortunately, I don't think there's enough data to really form the kind of conclusion on this policy which people are looking for, which makes sense because that's probably why we're still arguing about it. Anyways.